So I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of the National Working Waterfront Network. The network is comprised of businesses, industry, associations, nonprofits, communities, state and federal agencies, universities, sea grant programs, and individuals dedicated to preserving and enhancing our nation's working waterfronts and waterways. Through the network's efforts, which include a national conference, listserv, website, internships, a podcast, and webinars such as this one, the network helps increase the capacity of coastal communities and stakeholders to make informed decisions, balance diverse uses, ensure public access, and plan for a resilient future for their working waterfronts and waterways. If you're not already part of the network, I'd like to invite you to sign up for our listserv where you can post questions and learn about tools and resources. In addition, also see NOAA's Digital Coast website for data, tools, and training for your coastal management needs. So just a few housekeeping issues. I'd like to ask everyone to stay on mute, but feel free to place any questions in the chat box. And we will have time for Q&A after the presentations. And you can put questions in the chat box or raise your electronic hand during the Q&A sessions. And this webinar is being recorded and will be hosted on the network's website. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Shannon Hogan. Shannon is a member of the network and a research associate at the Urban Harbors Institute at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And Shannon manages the network's internship program and will be leading the webinar today. So Shannon.
Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you everyone for being here today. We're excited to be showcasing our interns' work that they did for the past few months. Just a little background if you're unfamiliar with the network and the internship program. We began this internship program in 2022 and have been able to continue the program with funding from the Walton Family Foundation, and they also helped us seed the program. The focus of this year's and past internships has been conducting applied research on and in partnership with commercial fishing communities, working directly with commercial fishermen and women. These internships provide graduate students with an opportunity to gain career skills and real-world experience while supporting industry members who focus on advancing the resilience of commercial fishing communities and working waterfronts. I thank the internship committee at the network, which is Laura, Kenneth, and Kristen, for their work to continue this program, and to our members as well. We are very grateful for your support, which has allowed us to grow this program. The first year, we probably had about 3 or so applicants, and this year we had about 15. So it's really grown. It's really great to see all of the collaborations we've been able to do. And we anticipate doing another round in the fall. So we will hopefully be putting out an RFP for projects sometime this summer. So keep an eye out for that, and that will have all the information on types of research we're looking for. But before we begin, I just want to introduce our interns from this past spring. We have Maya Griffith, who is from Duke University. She's a graduate student there working on her master's. We also have Allison Applin. She is also a graduate student at Duke University. And then we'll hear from Aradni, who is a PhD student at the University of California, Los Angeles. We'll have each intern present their work, and following each presentation, we'll open up the floor for Q&A. Please raise your hand digitally and we'll call on you, or you can put questions in the chat at the time of Q&A or during the presentations, and we'll read those questions off. But without further ado, I'm going to pass my screen on to Maya, who will get us started.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Alrighty, so I'm gonna jump right in. So I did a lot of work with the Georgia coast, and my project was looking at various opportunities for Georgia working waterfronts, as well as waterfronts elsewhere, and how we can move forward. Before I start, I just want to thank everybody who helped me out, including Brian and Shannon, who are both here today. So that is super incredible. And the funding and all the other institutions that provided me support during this internship. As Shannon said, I'm a Master's of Environmental Management student. I'm entering my second year, and I'm concentrating in coastal and marine systems, as well as environmental analytics and modeling. So let's dive in. Just a really brief background on some of the current issues facing working waterfronts. I'm sure a lot of you guys are familiar with these already. There's a lot of coastal development of new housing projects, especially. There's a lot of storm damage, which is only getting worse as climate change is increasing the frequency and severity of hurricanes. There's a lot of economic struggles facing them, especially in Georgia, as foreign imports are taking over the market, as well as an aging workforce, which is often called graying of the fleet. These are just some of the issues, and my report goal was to identify some current policies, laws, and opportunities for working waterfronts in Georgia, as well as potential avenues to move forward into the future. So the overall goal was to create this report and be able to share it with stakeholders as we move through and into the future. And I think we achieved that. Now, my presentation to stakeholders went into this report in a lot more detail. I'll mainly be doing an overview of the report, but our seminar went in a lot deeper in depth. So in terms of methods of how we achieved these goals, Brian was amazing. He provided a great overview of Georgia working waterfronts for me, as well as a bunch of resources to get me started. And then we moved into creating scheduled goals. Those really helped us keep on track during this time and throughout the internship, and helped us achieve everything that we wanted to. And then I started diving into Georgia specific things before moving on to the thick of it. So a lot of my internship was Google, read, take notes, and do that all over again. So it was really important to have good organization. So I had a lot of Google Docs. I also maintained a log of my resources throughout the internship so I could look back on them. And so Brian and I could talk through them as we moved along. We then decided to dive into Maine, which, as we'll see, is kind of a gold standard in terms of a lot of working waterfront issues. They've been working on it in a really big way for decades. And then we looked into other states as well. I also was able to use the National Working Waterfront Network as a resource. Shannon helped me join the listserv and put out an email to ask for resources, and I got a ton of really incredible responses from that. So that was really helpful. And then we refined that into a report. Before we did that, Brian helped set up a meeting with a county commissioner and a business owner who really helped us identify the goals of the report and refine what we wanted the report to be and how it could best help the people that we wanted it to help. So once those goals were finalized, I started writing, we started editing. Brian helped me a lot with the editing process, and we created a really incredible report, which we were then able to share with stakeholders. So again, Brian was super helpful throughout this entire internship. He helped organize an online seminar that we presented at last week, where I got to talk to a bunch of stakeholders. This is just a little piece from that. Again, I went into a lot more depth into my report in that seminar. But we had representatives from the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, fishers, dock owners, Sea Grant Extension, private consultants, and a bunch of other industry personnel. And Brian was able to then send out both my report as well as the recording of that seminar to other people. And we've already gotten some really incredible responses. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the report itself, I had a brief overview of waterfronts, and then I had 4 sections, starting with Georgia waterfronts, just a brief overview of what's going on with them, as well as current opportunities that exist. We then looked into other states. I focused on Maine, North Carolina, Alaska, and Florida because each of them kind of took a different tactic and had different successes. I then dive into some federal funding opportunities, of which there are many for current grants and funding avenues that are related to supporting working waterfronts. And then we have a section on moving forward, and Brian and I kind of came together to create some recommendations for the future and what might come next. So in terms of the format of the report. Each section includes this brief summary and overview of what is going to be talked about in that section. And most importantly, it has a table with these hyperlinks to all the relevant resources. Now, again, as you saw, I had a bunch of spreadsheets and I had to pare that down into a report that was going to be only the most useful of those resources, as well as some key information about each of them. So we're just going to do a quick overview of what I actually found from doing all this research. Again, I went into more depth in the other seminar, but Georgia itself has a lot of ongoing research into working waterfronts. They're really focused on the longevity of these commercial fishing waterfronts. There are various organizations that exist to help with planning and help support them. And I think that there's only going to be more as we move forward into the future. And speaking of the future, there's a ton of room for collaboration between stakeholders, both in Georgia and with other states. Collaboration is key. That is going to be a theme of this entire presentation, as well as I identified some future opportunities, including possible ways to harness agricultural regulations and tax incentives for working waterfronts. This was actually a really interesting part of our seminar. We had some discussions at the end of it about how they could possibly start working together within the industry to start putting some pressure on making those changes. So that was really cool to see some immediate response. In terms of other states, starting with Maine, they were highly collaborative and put a big emphasis on public education and outreach. And this was super important for Maine. And again, Maine has been doing this for decades. And because of that, they have a variety of economic incentives, state-funded grants that started in the early 2000s and have been re-funded ever since, which is super incredible. Then North Carolina, their working waterfronts showed a strong resilience to storms, which I thought was really interesting, as many states are really struggling with this. But in the reports that North Carolina has been putting out, they were finding that their docks and waterfronts actually showed a lot of resilience, as well as they have a present use taxation policy currently in place. However, one very interesting and important thing to note about that is that even though this exists for working waterfront industry to use, many people in the industry did not use it, either because they didn't know about it or because they were distrustful that it was actually there to help them. So again, that brings us back to collaboration is key, outreach is essential, and Maine, again, has done a really excellent job of that. Moving to Alaska, they focused on youth development. So they focused on addressing that issue of graying of the fleet that I talked about in the very beginning. They had different programs and grant opportunities to help invigorate and encourage young fishers to move into this industry. They also had plenty of city and county level assessments of their working waterfronts rather than statewide assessments, which I thought was really interesting. And it maybe shows that potentially doing smaller scale working waterfront assessments might be something that is more accessible and doable in the future, rather than trying to collaborate on a statewide working waterfront assessment. Now, in Florida, I found a lot of programs that provided economic and technical aid. There was one in particular that a lot of counties and cities were able to take advantage of, and it's been super useful. And they also had a big emphasis on land acquisition funding, which is mainly for protecting working waterfront land into the future. So stopping that land from being sold to things like land developers. Now, in terms of federal funding, as you can see, there is a ton of federal funding available, which was really encouraging to see. A lot of the people in my seminar did not know about most of these opportunities, and they were very excited about this particular section. Many of them were focused on climate resilience and hazard mitigation, which again is going to be super important, as those storms, as I mentioned earlier, are only going to intensify in frequency and severity. Also importantly, I found 3 pieces of major legislation that are currently in Congress that we can keep an eye on moving forward. In my seminar, I went into each of these in a lot more detail, but for now, just know that these are all currently in Congress, and some of them are making some really good headway. So hopefully some things are coming down the pipes pretty soon. Now, in terms of moving forward at the federal level, we recommended keeping an eye on those 3 pieces of legislation, as well as exploring those opportunities for funding and support. In addition to the links that I put in the federal funding section, I also had another section that had a more broad links to various resources in case they wanted to expand their search beyond those that I have selected. At the state level, we were hoping that they would continue focusing on current waterfront issues, as well as using other states for guidance. Georgia, again, they're starting to really back these working waterfronts, but it's important that they use the knowledge and share the knowledge amongst each other and amongst other states to do the best work possible, as well as, again, focusing on those current tax policies that are agricultural to then benefit working waterfronts, as that has been an avenue of success for other states. Again, outreach is key. Outreach is everything. Collaboration is key. This is super, super important. And every success story that I saw, it was almost always based off of a high amount of public education and outreach. So if Georgia can begin doing this, engaging with their broader community, swaying public opinion, increasing awareness of those issues and potential avenues for success, this is going to be really important. And the last thing that Brian and I noticed was there's not really a standard definition of working waterfronts in Georgia and beyond, which making a standard definition would probably help push legislation through, especially at the federal level, because if everyone has a different definition of what a waterfront is, that makes it really difficult to get anything done. And just to bring it home, some of those challenges that we were facing was it was difficult to know when the research was done. There's new things coming out all the time. There's so much work being done into working waterfronts that it was hard to pare it down. I think we did a pretty good job. We also, again, learned collaboration is key, outreach is everything, as well as organization is really important. There was a lot of information out there, so paring it down and putting it in an organized fashion was really vital. And in terms of applications, we hope that stakeholders are able to use this as a resource for information, funding opportunities, and more. We've already had some really good response from that seminar and from people who have already read my report, so that's really excellent to hear. We also hope that it creates links between people. Increasing the power of the network is super important. And again, we were having people meeting each other and finding ways that they can help each other in my seminar last week. So it was just incredible to see, as well as providing a foundation for future work in this sector to help sustain these commercial fishing, working waterfronts in Georgia and beyond, which is going to be super important. So with that, thank you so much. I welcome all questions. And again, thank you to Shannon, Brian, and everybody else who helped me along the way.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maya. Yeah, if folks have questions, they can put it in the chat. They can also raise their hand. We'll give folks a few minutes to think. I do have a question while we're waiting for others to come in. I was just curious if others are looking to do similar work or, trying to find these opportunities, where would you point them to? Kind of some of the resources you looked at.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my report is a great place to start, to be honest, because a lot of the resources that I found took some Googling, took some asking the network, took Brian to send them to me. And I think that I did my best to really put them together into a really easy to use format. So now when people are trying to find like, oh, I would love a broad resource on working waterfronts, I have links to various things. One of those links is the National Working Waterfront website, because you guys were super helpful and a great resource, especially in the beginning, trying to find other resources. So I think that from my research, it just shows the importance of making more things like the report that I made so that it's easier for people to find the resources to get started on their own work.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's super important. There's a question about, is the report available? So it will be available, I imagine, following finalizing the report. The network will also be sharing it, but are there other ways that you and Brian plan on sharing the report?
Brian has emailed it out to one of his email lists for Georgia people, so I imagine we can definitely share it however we can, because I would love for this to be available long term. Potentially there's maybe ways to get it up on a website somewhere, maybe somewhere on the Working Waterfront Network website. That would be great. So that,
yep, it'll definitely be posted on our website and shared through the listserv as well.
Perfect.
Any other questions?
Has Georgia settled on a definition? No, Georgia has not settled on a definition of working waterfronts. As Brian also reiterated there, which is, again, one of the issues that we kind of identified. It's really hard to make policies and laws and regulations if a working waterfront means something different to you, means something different to me. So standardizing that definition would be a process. Again, like you probably need to get some lawyers involved, some scientists involved, some fishers involved. We need to know what that waterfront actually means to the broader community in order to kind of create that definition, because Maine has a different definition, different counties have different definitions. And again, that is really difficult when making laws and regulations. Any more questions? All right, amazing. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now.
Thanks, Maya. All right,
Yeah.
we are going to pass it over to Ali Applin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Maya, great job. I'll just get my screen ready here. So welcome to my presentation on hurricane disaster relief for commercial fishermen in Florida. My name is Ali Applin. I'm an incoming second-year Duke Master of Environmental Management student in coastal and marine systems, as well as environmental economics and policy. And in the last few months, I worked with Hugh Chiparone from the Gulf of Mexico Reef Shareholders Alliance, which is a fishermen's organization that works with and for commercial fishermen to advocate for them and their needs, as well as to promote sustainable fisheries and ocean conservation. And Hugh and I wanted to understand the importance of working waterfronts for the resiliency of commercial fisheries after hurricanes and disasters. So our goal in this project was to address the lack of information on hurricane impacts, both social and economic, on Florida's working waterfronts and commercial fishing industry. And to do that, we came up with two different deliverables that we wanted to share. And the first one was to develop a comprehensive resource in the form of an infographic and a comprehensive report to aid commercial fishermen in hurricane recovery efforts. And this first deliverable is aimed at the audience of commercial fishermen specifically. And so we also wanted something for the general public for science communication. And so our second goal was to encourage community support for policies that benefit Florida's commercial fishermen and working waterfronts through a documentary that we went and filmed in Florida. And on the right-hand side, you can actually see some of the damage from the recent hurricane in Florida that still hasn't been cleaned up in Steinhatchee. For this project, our method started out with some phone interviews with fishermen from the Shareholders Alliance and fish house owners in the Gulf region, mainly in Florida. And this allowed me to really get to know fishermen and their needs and what impacts they felt to be most important for us to share, both in our documentary and to focus on in our infographic and comprehensive report. And so that led us to a large literature review on both the federal and state Florida disaster relief resources, which I found pretty much anywhere and everywhere on the internet, spanning from FEMA and NOAA to Reddit to find where fishermen have gained resources in the past. And from there, I developed an infographic that outlines our larger report. And from all the information that we had gained so far, we were able to come up with some documentary interview questions that we used in our Florida trip where we filmed our documentary. And now we're on that final stage of finishing up our infographic and film products. And speaking of our final products, this is our final infographic. And that huge QR code on the right-hand side is the link to the detailed report. So the idea is that this can be on a website in a PDF format or given to fishermen in person. And they can either click or scan the QR code, and that will take them to a really comprehensive report that this infographic outlines all the different parts of it. And then they can go and find the extensive information there and resources. And we started with preparation resources so that fishermen can know how to be safe during the storm, but then also know how to best set themselves up for success to receive funding and other resources after a storm hits. And then we also shared business relief resources, which we split into two different categories. The first being immediate support. So this is support that commercial fishermen can gain within hopefully around a year of applying. And this is small business administration loans, FEMA disaster assistance, and largely Florida state loans and assistance programs, while they wait for the more extended support, which includes the NOAA Fishery Disaster Assistance, which can take 3 years for fishermen to actually receive that support, as well as community grants that could also take a few years to receive. We also wanted to share some other post-disaster relief, such as housing and food resources, unemployment assistance, and even free legal resources for anything that commercial fishermen could be in need of after a disaster hits. For our story, for our documentary, we gained the information that led us to this narrative through all of our phone interviews, as well as when we actually hit the ground in Florida and started asking questions. And the main take-home messages that we heard and also want our audience to hear is how central to the culture and the economy of Florida commercial fishing and seafood is, the need for and the current lack of working waterfronts in the form of fish houses and safe dockages in Florida, the need for consumers to stand up, support local fishermen, and support local domestic seafood, and the need for legislators to support and preserve working waterfronts in their policy, and for the general public to also let their legislators know that that's something that we care about. And while we unfortunately do not have the final video product for you today, it is in the works. I did put aside a few documentary clips for you to kind of get an idea of what our fishermen and fish house owners had to say. And so this first is Glenn, who's a fish house and vessel owner in Ingles, Florida. And he talks a little bit about commercial fishing and the importance to Florida.
And from there, I have learned how important it is to the economy and just delivering fresh fish to the public. Give them access to fresh fish.
And also, just a heads up, you might want to turn up your volume all the way. I know it's a little quiet on the Zoom format. But our next video is from Lisa, who's a vessel owner in Crystal River, Florida. And she talks about some of the difficulties with safe dockage space when a storm hits.
Has more vessels than slips.
Oh yeah, yes. They're always jockeying for position as to where to put the boats. And one particular place has way more boats than they do slips. So sometimes they have to anchor out, and particularly when they're all coming in chased by a storm, a tropical storm, a hurricane, they all come in at once, it becomes a big problem. And some of them have to anchor out.
And next we have Kenny, who's a boat captain in Madeira Beach, Florida. And his first clip here, he is talking about the linkages between commercial fishermen and working waterfronts. And then the second video is a few solutions that he sees.
Infrastructure is everything. There's a thing to it. Fishing boats need fish houses, and fish houses need fishing boats. It goes hand in hand in tandem. And the less fish houses that there are, the less accessibility that we have to be able to ice, bait. I'm all about legislators backing working waterfronts, and I'm all about the consumers getting to the seafood.
And here we have Rich, who works with Glenn in Ingles, Florida, and he's a boat captain. And he chats a little bit about the struggles as a small business owner compared to the bigger developers in working waterfronts.
Our local docks are becoming very obsolete around here. It's harder for the little man to stay in business and to do what they do because of the private investors and people that have absolutely nothing to do with our fishing. Our local docks are.
And for our last clip, I just want to preface that I know that a lot of these videos are chatting a little bit more about the hardships and the struggles with hurricanes, with disasters, with our working waterfronts in the current state that they are. But with each of our interviewees, we did also chat with them a lot about solutions and what they see as a good path forward. And we want that also to be a really big take-home message of our documentary. And so here is Jason, who's a fish house owner and vessel owner in Madeira Beach, Florida. and he talks a little bit about how consumers can contribute to supporting commercial fishermen.
You want to do what you can to help commercial fishermen. You need to make a point to ask for fresh domestic. You know, it can't always be local, because one of the things people don't understand is that if you, in a certain region, you have an abundance of one particular species, so it's got to go everywhere else. But at the least they can do to verify what they're getting is domestic.
And as fun and amazing as our whole project was, it didn't come without its challenges, which led to a lot of amazing lessons learned. Our one challenge was me realizing the timeline of recovery resources for commercial fishermen isn't always easy. There's often a big gap for commercial fishermen to gain funding that makes it hard for them to land back on their feet after a big disaster event occurs. And finding these resources was sometimes also convoluted, as Maya also mentioned in her project. Hugh and I also, neither of us had any previous film experience at all going into this project. So there was a steep learning curve, and we learned a lot in the process. I now know a lot more about sunlight, bringing backup batteries, all the equipment needed, and all the little helpful tips. So I'm really grateful that we were able to learn so much about this different sphere of science communication. I also had never done any type of qualitative interview work before. I had never come up with questions or really interviewed other than very casually. And so learning to interview was a challenge, but I feel that I've really learned how to formulate interview questions with the help of my amazing mentor, Hugh. And now I feel a lot more comfortable chatting with commercial fishermen about these issues. And this whole process gave me a lot more empathy for commercial fishermen and understanding of their experience, which I think is really valuable to someone coming from the conservation and ecology space. And I know that a huge take home for me was the importance of working waterfronts and access to safe dockages for disaster recovery is very paramount to commercial fishery safety and success. As far as for future plans and applications, we hope to put our infographic and comprehensive report onto a separate website page on the Shareholders Alliance website. It'll also be on the Working Waterfront Network, so you can find it there. We hope to finish the edits and share the documentary in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that. We have an amazing colleague, Kylie, that's helping us edit this. And Hugh is running a November hurricane workshop where he'll share a lot of these resources to commercial fishermen in person, which will be amazing. I can't wait to hear all about that. And as far as applications, we hope that these infographics and reports are a really great resource for this upcoming hurricane season. I'm sure you all have heard that there's reports that it'll be a pretty tough one. So we hope it'll help prepare commercial fishermen as best as we can. And also the documentary influence on the community. We hope, especially during an election year, that this documentary or video can help influence the general public to be really passionate and compassionate towards commercial fishermen and ask their legislators for support on preserving working waterfronts in Florida and around the country in general. And with that, thank you so much. Especially thank you to Hugh, Eric, and Ashford at the Shareholders Alliance, and to Shannon at the Working Waterfront Network. And I'm happy to take any questions anyone has at this time.
Please put your questions in the chat or raise your hand. Thank you, Alex. Great presentation. I did have a question. In doing the interviews and going through and connecting with commercial fishermen over the phone, and also, visiting them, was there anything that maybe you wanted to ask or didn't ask that you thought about after the fact, like going through this process? Were there things that you thought that other information that could have been useful that you didn't realize at the time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that coming from the marine biology ecology lens that I have previously, there are so many questions that I wish I could have asked if we had had more time, just on the stock assessment side of things and kind of how they do their work as well. That wasn't necessarily the goal of this project, but that was something I wish I had asked them more about. And in terms of this project, I think that after the fact with the interviews, it was more so about the delivery of our questions or how we reacted to their questions or answers that we felt that we learned a lot from, instead of the questions that we were asking. Because honestly, once they started talking, they were so passionate that they went through so much more than we even asked. But I suppose I would love to hear more, not just about the general safe dockages of things, but what other working waterfront issues that they see prevalent maybe in their community that maybe doesn't direct them as directly, but could be impactful for the overall community. I think that would have been really useful.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. You guys did great work. And it's always nice to hear directly from the fishermen as well. Any other thoughts or questions? All right. If not, we'll pass it off to Rodney.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ariadne Reynolds. I am a PhD student at UCLA's Institute of Environment and Sustainability. I've been working this spring with Sarah Schaffler from NOAA's Seafood Strategy Coordinator as an intern with the National Working Waterfront Program. I'm sorry about missing the first part of the meeting. My internet went out like right away, and I'm using my phone as a hotspot right now. So just let me know if it's not working. So the focus of my work this spring has been looking at how seafood hubs can support local seafood system resilience. So why do we need to think about our seafood systems? Well, in the United States, seafood supports approximately 1.2 million jobs and $165 billion in sales across the economy. However, in many states, much of the seafood that's caught or grown locally is exported, and we import most of the seafood that we consume. For example, between 2008 and 2019, California has exported an annual average of $320 million in seafood products internationally, while importing an annual average of $4.5 billion of seafood products. So in order to shift that dynamic, we need to understand the challenges facing our seafood systems. So the first is climate change impacts. Warming and acidifying oceans are shifting species distributions and increasing the spread of diseases, which is disrupting established marine ecosystems and fisheries. And this is making commercial fishing less predictable and profitable than it once was. There's also aging infrastructure. Many ports and fishing vessels are outdated and local processing plants have shut down. This is contributing to the inefficiencies in those supply chains. Gentrification, this development focusing on tourism and luxury housing, has replaced a lot of the working waterfront infrastructure in the US, and this is decreasing access and opportunities for local food production. And then there's workforce challenges. So the seafood industry is facing a graying of the fleet as experienced fishermen retire, leading to labor shortages and a loss of critical institutional knowledge. And this is a picture of Bobby Austin. He is a San Pedro commercial fisherman who recently retired from fishing at the age of 99 years old. And global import and export markets have completely changed the way that we trade and eat seafood. US fishermen have to compete with a flood of cheap commodity seafood imports, making it challenging to sell their catch locally and regionally. People are used to eating the same 5 species of seafood and having it available year-round and buying it at low cost. And this is pretty impossible to compete with when you're working under strict environmental regulations and labor laws. And then exporting that local seafood catch can provide fishermen with a quick return, but not necessarily the highest profit margin. When fishermen offload their catch to large processors and distributors, they don't have to worry about the rest of the supply chain, but they are kind of at the mercy of the price offered for their catch at that moment. And then the focus on these export markets has led to a decrease in local demand for small and mid-scale processing, which is perpetuating this loss of infrastructure along US waterfronts. So the question is, how can we increase local and regional access to sustainable seafood while supporting commercial fishing livelihoods and increasing coastal community resilience? And we're learning through our research that part of the answer lies in what we call seafood hubs. So to understand what a seafood hub is or can be, we looked to the agricultural sector, where food hubs are a more common practice. And the USDA defines a food hub as a business or organization that actively manages the aggregation, distribution, and marketing of source-identified food products, primarily from local and regional producers. This concept is rare in the seafood sector, but it may be a missing link to keeping seafood and the resulting economic value in the coastal communities. And an important part of seafood hubs is that they're individualized. So the services that a seafood hub provides will depend on the needs of individual coastal communities. But understanding the bottlenecks and gaps in those local systems is an important first step in determining what services to offer. So here's some potential functions of seafood hubs. The first is cold storage. So temperature controlled facilities are a really important part of seafood storage, and this can give fishermen more leverage and freedom when selling their catch. As I described before, if they're able to hold their seafood in a refrigerated or frozen space, they don't have to immediately offload their catch. The second is processing for convenience. These are things like filleting, vacuum sealing, flash freezing, deveining, and shelling. And this can increase customer convenience and offer specific cuts of seafood as opposed to having to sell the whole organism. The third is processing for preservation and creating value-added products. These are things like canning, smoking, dehydrating, and developing new products by combining local seafood with other ingredients. So you can imagine like a smoked oyster product that's then canned and combined with a local olive oil and herbs from a neighboring farm, which just adds economic value for all of the producers involved. And then the fourth is diverse distribution channels. So seafood hubs can connect local fishermen directly to wholesale and retail consumers through e-commerce platforms, community-supported fishery models, and regional distribution networks. And then it can also aggregate multiple fishermen's catch for bargaining leverage. So one fisherman might not have enough product to supply a large institution, but if several fishermen bring their catch to a seafood hub, they can combine supplies to make it worth it for large consumers to purchase from them. And these are not all of the possible functions of seafood hubs. We can also think of seafood hubs hosting live fish auctions, retail and restaurant spaces, etc. But again, community needs will determine the focus and the combination of services that a seafood hub could provide. So as part of the internship work this spring, I looked for organizations on the West Coast of the US that were taking one or more parts of the seafood supply chain and filling those gaps in the local and regional markets for seafood. This is just a snapshot of some of the organizations that came up. And you can see it's organized by some of the food hub function categories that we talked about. And through this research, we decided to focus in on one collective organization for our case study called the Oregon Ocean Cluster Initiative. So the Oregon Ocean Cluster Initiative is a really interesting model, and I'm going to walk you through this system map to illustrate how it's been organized. Just as a disclaimer, this is not a full picture of every person and entity involved, just the people that we've talked to so far and some of the organizations that they've talked about. So the cluster was initiated by Marcus Hinz, and he is the director of the Oregon Coast Visitors Association, along with Kristen Penner, who's a former fisherman and has her own company doing seafood supply chain consulting, and Laura Anderson, who owns a seafood restaurant and processing facility called Local Ocean. So the Oregon Coast Visitors Association was able to make the case through data analysis that economic leakage was occurring through the export of Oregon's seafood products. And they led the effort to get initial funding from the USDA's Local Food Promotion Grant Program. That and other funding was rolled into creating full-time positions at the Central Coast Food Web, including Joe Seawall, who's now the co-executive director there. The Central Coast Food Web provides an e-commerce platform for the public to buy local seafood and farm products, and manages the Aquina Food Lab, which serves as a processing facility and experimental test kitchen for small and mid-scale seafood harvesters and producers. And the Aquina Food Lab is housed in a warehouse that was purchased by Laura Anderson for her restaurant, Local Ocean, and is shared with the cluster initiative. So as you can see, there are many passionate individuals and organizations involved in making this a successful and lasting effort up in Oregon. And then through a series of interviews with the leaders who started the cluster, I've started pulling out some themes of what makes an effort like this successful and what the people on the ground find to be the most important aspects of organizing a seafood hub effort. So the first theme was connecting resources, and I'll just read one of the quotes from each of these themes. So Marcus said, if you believe a food system is an actual system, then you can't just fix one part of it and ignore the rest. It just doesn't work that way. There are parts of our food system that are playing different roles, but there's really no one doing the shuttle diplomacy, creating the cohesiveness and the dialogue between all of these partners so things just function a little better. That's the role that we're playing. And then adding capacity. And Kristen said, it takes partners who are leaders in the industry and have the operational knowledge of everything from understanding what's happening in our ocean to the regulatory challenges and reality of the systems we're operating in. And then the third theme is community co-creation. And Kristen said, the producer experience is so huge to really understand, like what it takes to handle the fish and get your boat out into the water. The buy-in of the fishing community. I mean, why are we doing this work if it's not deeply rooted in and being done with this community? Not for them, but with the community so that it really responds in real time. And so building off of these themes, the Ocean Cluster Initiative has undertaken project activities in 3 areas, with the work of partners expanding to fill other needs as well. The first is infrastructure investment. So the cluster has assisted with the funding and development of the Aquina Food Lab to offer producers a place to process and store their catch. And they have plans to construct and deploy mobile processing units that can travel where they're needed throughout the state. The second is workforce development. So the organization is working with high school and college programs to create certificate programs in seafood processing and commercial live tank operation and maintenance. And the third is capacity building and partnerships. And just having that multi-jurisdictional view of the system has allowed these leaders to understand the needs along the supply chain and help fill those gaps and connect the people who can benefit from collaboration. The Oregon Ocean Cluster Initiative has developed online platforms that give a full picture of coastal Oregon's seafood system needs and available resources. So the picture on the left is the Oregon Seafood Prospector, and this explores Oregon's seafood landings, processing, and distribution in a data-rich interactive story map. The snapshot on the left is the cluster's capital access roadmap, which shows funding opportunities for local food initiatives organized by types of funding in Oregon coastal counties. And these are just 2 of the resources that the cluster has made available on their website. And it just shows that they're really invested in transferring this knowledge to the broader food community. So just to wrap it up, many coastal communities in the US are lacking this critical human and physical infrastructure that is needed to keep seafood in local and regional food systems. And having these things that we're thinking of as seafood hubs, which can look different in any community, can bridge these gaps in the supply chain to connect producers to consumers and keep that economic and food value in the community. And the critical components that we've found for success include leaders who are knowledgeable about the seafood supply chain and can work across jurisdictions, fishermen who are willing to be early adopters and buy into these efforts, and diverse funding sources during the project conception. So thank you for listening, and I'll take any questions, or you can also email me at the address below.
Thank you, Ari. We'll take questions in the chat, or anyone can raise their hand as well. You can also ask general questions as this time about the network's internship program, or also for other interns if you have a question that came up after. Specifically for you, Ari, I had a question kind of about the case study that you did and potentially other hubs that you looked into. And you already touched on this a little bit, but maybe what was really like the most difficult or challenging thing for getting something like this started? Was that something you discussed with some of your interviewees or through your findings through your research?
Yeah, there was definitely a few things that people mentioned. There's definitely some territorialism that goes along with the different organizations working in this sector. So port organizations feel like they have, a duty to do something, and economic development agencies feel like they're, this is their job. And so Marcus was kind of saying like, don't duplicate their efforts, but also don't, be scared off by territorialism. If someone says something is working, they're doing it, but it's still not working, then it's not working. And just keep going forward and making those connections, regardless of, who says that it's their job to do it, because clearly it's not like being done. And then the other challenges, we're just making these processing facilities, once they're online, work for small scale fishermen. Joe, who's the co-executive director of the Central Coast Food Web, was saying that, a lot of the small scale fishermen, they want to be involved in things like this, but again, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of time to change the way that you've been doing things for, your whole career. And so if they're not able to make money, they're already operating, at a very small margin. So if they're not able to make money doing it this different way, it's going to be really hard for them to be involved. So just making sure that what you're doing is actually working for the producers has been a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. It's growing a market and a network for it. Any other questions?
Sarah says in the chat, what advice would you give someone or some community looking to develop a seafood hub? I would say if you want to develop a seafood hub, to first really get to know all of the stakeholders in the community that you're trying to develop a seafood hub. So even if you're involved in the community at one level, we've found that it's just really important to get to know people at different levels of the supply chain and involved in different parts of the seafood community. In order to make a seafood hub work, it clearly takes a lot of energy and a lot of people at each step of the way. So I think, talking to people and making sure that producers and someone who can, handle the distribution and retail markets and understanding marketing is really important to get something started like this. Thanks for the question, Sarah.
Okay, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions coming through, so I guess we can start to wrap up. I really just want to thank all the interns. You guys did great work, and it was great to see this through the presentations. I'm super excited to share this work with the network and also just through other channels as well. You guys are really hardworking. Just really proud of all the work that you've done. I also want to thank everyone for attending, and I want to make one correction in my previous thank you to the internship committee. I didn't include Mike Lifwin, so I just want to say thank you to Kenneth, Laura, Mike, and Kristen as well. And I'll be forwarding some stuff through the listserv from the research findings from these interns. But thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.